The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are taking a look at Bob Jenkins, the survivor/rogue investigator in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these investigator reviews. If you'd like to support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Special thanks to Coleman Rochitty for the amazing art that graces the channel, Nicole Fiskus for the new Whisper in Darkness logo that graces the podcast, and Nate Lost in Time and Space for the intro as well as the overlays. Thank you very much. I couldn't do it without you. Without further ado, let's get started. We are back with our reviews of the investigators in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. We're going to wrap up our reviews with a look at Bob Jenkins, the salesman, the survivor investigator in the box. Of course, with all of the investigators, Bob starts off as a survivor, but he doesn't stay one for long as he starts to dip into the rogue card pool once he gains some experience. Bob has 2 willpower, 4 intellect, 3 combat, and 3 agility. He has the entrepreneur trait. At any time, an investigator at your location may reveal to you the item assets in their hand. You may take an additional action during your turn, which can only be used to play an item asset from the hand of an investigator at your location under their control. Both investigators may spend resources to pay its cost. His Elder Sign effect is +1 for each item asset you control. He has 6 health and 8 sanity. Now, there are a couple of interesting points about Bob's stat line. Survivors, in general, have pretty good willpower and pretty mediocre intellect. Bob flips the script on that one. Because he is a rogue, his willpower is only 2. And he has, I believe, the best intellect of any survivor in the currently available in the game at 4. So, whereas many a survivor relies on cards like Look What I Found in order to discover clues, Bob doesn't necessarily have to do that. What do you guys think about Bob's stat line?
Oh man, Bob is really good. That ability is something else.
Yeah, the stat line means he can actually do investigations, and he can use lockpicks pretty well. I should note that for intellect on a non-seeker, and even to, I guess, further along from that, investigators that don't have seeker access, that is a rarity. In fact, there is only one other investigator in the game that has 4 intellect and doesn't have seeker access. Who is it?
It's one of the dogs.
Yep, it's Duke the Good Boy with 4 intellect. That is the only other character with no seeker access that has 4 intellect. So, like, my point being is that 4 intellect and 5 intellect have been, like, pretty much the domain of seekers, with, like, a few exceptions. You know, like Finn Edwards or Marie Limbeau. So Bob having 4 intellect as a survivor and rogue he's kind of in a class of his own.
So tell us about Bob's ability here.
Oh man, it is so good. Being able to hang around your friends and buy stuff for them as the rogue player is so incredibly valuable. It's like you could go on for hours and hours explaining various situations where that ability becomes handy, but you know, your guardian.
That's what we're here for, right? We have hours and hours to talk about all.
Well, your guardian wants to play their Cyclopean hammer, and Bob can just pay for it with his Schaffner's catalog, no problem. Easy peasy.
It's worth noting before you start building Bob, as I have seen some people get a little confused as to like the nuance of Bob's ability. Okay, so during Bob's turn, he gets a bonus action to play an item from the hand of anybody at his location under that investigator's control. So he can't borrow items from others. He can't give an item from his hand to another investigator. He can only go from that investigator's hand to that investigator's play area. It comes up because, there not a lot of investigators have this level of team interaction. So if you're not the Bob player, you might like forget in the moment how his ability actually works. So I just thought I'd run through that.
Yeah, think of him more like a loan shark than a salesman. He's more like giving you the money and the time to be able to get things when you want them. And that's what makes it so good, is that Bob can take his turn, let the Guardian play their weapon before they have to deal with the enemies on their turn. Like little things like that about Bob's ability and like how you can time when you play items it just makes him so powerful.
What can I do to get you in this car today?
What can I do to see you with this nice, lovely Cyclopean hammer?
Okay, so the action is taken during Bob's turn, and it's a play action. If he's not engaged with anything, the Guardian or whoever else can play something without provoking attacks of opportunity because it's Bob's action.
Yep.
And that saved me a few times where it's like, if I'm hanging around Bob, I don't have to play the weapon in advance until after I've drawn the baddie, and because I know Bob has got me covered.
Yeah, it essentially turns that action into a fast action for the Guardian, so they don't have to worry. It's like, oh, I got caught out without a weapon, or my gun is empty, I need a new one.
Exactly.
Bob steps in and says, okay, well, as long as you've got it in your hand, you can play it without taking an attack of opportunity. And not only that, can you play it, but I'll pay for it, so you don't have to pay the resources, so you can save those resources for something else that you may need.
Yeah, or even just the crypt chill hit me during Mythos phase that I wasn't expecting.
And my gun's gone.
And my gun is gone, or something along those lines. It can go the other way around too. Like maybe Bob just needs to get enough stuff down early in the game so he can get set up, and his ability allows him to get extra actions for himself too.
Yeah, that's another aspect we get to talk about, is that it can be very tempting when building an Arkham Horror deck to just load up on assets. But normally, a problem with loading up on lots of assets is you're basically promising a play action for every one of those assets that you add up that you put into your deck. So if you're trying to build a deck and you end up with like 18 assets, like that deck is gonna be, honestly, that's gonna be kind of a slow deck, because you're promising all those play actions to get all those assets on the table. Bob, however, he doesn't have this problem nearly as much because he gets that bonus action, that fourth action for the play action. Now, even if you're not playing an asset every turn, the fact that he can help you get a nice tableau going without having to like bog yourself down and wasting multiple turns doing it is actually very powerful. And then what's even more powerful is the fact that his buddies can safely play more assets, knowing that they won't have to spend as many play actions getting what they want out on the table. And I think that's the real power, is letting everybody have more asset-centric decks.
It's sort of this like intangible property of just the nature of how his ability works and how it sort of breaks the time flow of the game. Yeah. Like normally I, as the Lily player, would have to play my asset on my turn and take an attack of opportunity to hit that enemy. But now all of a sudden, Bob's ability just completely negates any concern for that. So, it's so good.
Yeah, and I think as we've seen with a lot of these abilities that give you an extra action on your turn, that in itself is very powerful. I mean, Finn Edwards, he wants to evade enemies, he gets a free evade every turn. That's fantastic. Stella Clark if she fails a skill test, she gets an extra action on her turn. Any of these sorts of abilities that give you extra actions they're going to snowball as the scenario goes on. So if you're not only getting extra actions for Bob himself, but you're sort of contributing those extra actions, like Bob, like most investigators with extra actions just keep them for themselves. And you are sort of, with Bob, you're able to sort of distribute them to all of your friends around the table and say, oh, you need an extra action this turn? Let me give you a hand.
What's also another thing that's really nice about Bob's ability is that he kind of smooths out everyone's cost curves of their decks, Because if you're in a situation where it's like, I want to play my 45 automatic, but I only have 3 resources, Bob says, let me get you into that used car. I'll help you out. And so it kind of smooths everything around and means that not only do investigators have to take fewer play actions, but they probably will have to take fewer resource actions to afford their stuff, because he can kind of help cover that gap if an investigator's caught short.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's especially true with, Guardians having, the lion's share of items that they want to be playing. You could also say the same about Mystics. They can be pretty tight on resources as well. Of the 5 classes, those are the 2 that I would sort of point out as being sort of resource poor. And if you're teaming up with Bob in that case, he can really help you out there. So you can have your Holy Rosary and your Sixth Sense too. So that's very nice. His Elder Sign effect is pretty typical. We've seen this sort of effect before, +1 for X number of things you have. If Bob is playing even a few assets, that's going to be good. The one thing to point out is that Bob's 2 willpower is potentially a bit of an issue, although he does have 8 sanity, so even a Rotting Remains, if he blows that, he should be okay. Again, he does have access to enough survivor cards that survivors have plenty of soak in Cherished Keepsake and whatnot, and it's an item, of course, so he can soak that horror, and he does have access to the upper level rogue cards as well, so we saw a lot of those in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. We have things like Savant, which I believe you add your lowest other skill to your test, so he's testing a 5 willpower, or possibly even more than that, isn't it?
6.
Yeah, it's got 1 wild skill icon +3.
Yeah.
So he's testing it a 6 with Savant. You've got Moxie, either level of that. Composure, you've got Counter Espionage as another option. And if you want to begin a campaign with that, In the Thick of It is an option. And then you can just grab those right at the beginning, some mixture of those, and you're good to go.
Although, to be honest, what you want to do with Bob if you're playing In the Thick of It, you gotta go for Sharon Zobel. All in, baby.
That's right. That is another popular option for Bob, is picking up Sharon Zobel right at the beginning of a campaign, so you're not missing out on that scenario's worth of experience points. That brings us to the backside of Bob Jenkins, deck size 30, deck building options, survivor cards level 0, rogue cards level 1 to 5, neutral cards level 0 to 5, and up to 5 other rogue cards level 0. Deck building requirements do not count towards his deck size, his signature asset, Shrewd Dealings, and Greed, and of course 1 basic weakness. Now, I took a peek over at Arkham DB, and there seems to be one Bob build that is pretty much dominating the decks at this time, and that is basically taking Bob, you pick up 2 copies of Scavenging, so you can scavenge items out of your discard pile, 2 copies of Schaffner's catalogs, you can pay for those items on the cheap. Your selection of good survivor items, there are really too many to mention at this point. I've seen things like the shovel, you've got Mariner's Compass, you've got Cherished Keepsake, Leather Coat, any of the weapons like the 18 Derringer, etc., etc. And then a couple of skills, and you're pretty much done at that point. What is your guys' experience with building Bob?
That pretty much, honestly.
I think that deck, I think it's only scratching the surface, because that sort of deck, it seems like it's trying to do a self-engine where it's like, okay, I play my Schaffner's Catalog, I use it to play an item, I discard my Schaffner's Catalog, I use my lockpicks, I use my scavenging, I get back my Schaffner's Catalog, I play my Schaffner's Catalog. It seems very like self-sustaining, but I think it's only like basic Bob that is what's going on there. I think there's a lot more you can do, especially to help the team and help the team move quickly, that deck doesn't quite get to. And I'm talking things like Untimely Transaction, You Owe Me One, Black Market. I think there's more you can do than just scavenging tricks. Yeah.
I mean, that being said, the scavenging tricks are pretty good. Because usually,
Yeah,
like, you're scavenging with lockpicks. Lockpicks
yeah.
triggers your lucky cigarette case. I'm essentially drawing 2 cards off an investigate. So it's like
Yeah.
doing
It's
that, and then
nothing that Finn or Jenny couldn't already do. Though it's to a greater extent than Finn or Jenny could already do.
yeah, and I think the difference with Bob is that he inherently helps the team because he can pay for things.
Yeah, and I think that's
Yes.
the real power. And I think the real power starts coming from when other people start building their decks, knowing that Bob is on the table.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the real untapped potential.
Yeah, because then you can start considering items in your seeker deck that you may not have otherwise. Maybe you include
Yeah.
manuscripts, like Neconic manuscripts.
Mhm.
Normally that's very expensive, but now you have Bob to help you pay for it or something along those lines. Yeah,
Yeah, or things like a Guardian who's able to afford both a 6-cost lightning gun and Brother Xavier pretty easily. That's hard if you're a Guardian to be able to afford a giant ally and a giant gun. So, but Bob helps.
I think this is also the first scavenging deck in Rogue that like makes sense. Whereas we had Preston before, but you couldn't really do that with Preston. And we had Min, and Min could kind of do that, but this card pool I feel like is the best fit for it. And now you get all the expensive rogue items.
Yeah, it's the
Which
Sharpener's Catalog, and I think it's also the old Keyring. Those are like the real scavenging targets because they discard themselves and you can recycle them.
hmm
Yeah, it's they make it pretty easy to do.
I was like, Wendy was another candidate as well, but Wendy doesn't get level 3 to 5 rogue cards, which I
Yeah.
think you benefit more from in a deck like that versus having the extra survivor access.
Oh, there's a kind of an obscure item that I think might work really well in this kind of deck. Tennessee Sour Mash level 3.
Mm-hmm.
The rogue one because it's fast, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And it discards itself. So, and I think it also can boost willpower tests. So, yeah, there you go, willpower tests. I do think it's very possible to go too hard on the scavenging engine, though, to the point where you're not getting a whole lot done.
Yes. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can sort of just dirtle
Yeah.
for sure. You can sort of just sit there and investigate, grabbing one clue at a time when you really need to be picking up the pace a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas Bob is definitely a self-sustaining engine, but it is definitely slow.
Mhm.
And I would say the other weakness that I've come up in the games that I've played with Vase is that we're so focused on making sure that we've got everything that we need on the board that we forget about greed. And we're sort of like, we're spending all of his money, and then, crap.
The teddy bear. Don't forget the teddy bear.
So once you have earned some experience points, Bob can lean into the all of the the rogue upgrades, and there are many good ones for Bob. There are many good ones even in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. You've got things like Black Market, you've got Untimely Transaction, you've got Unscrupulous Loan, all cards like that. If you want to really be evil, you can play Aeon Chart 4, which is an item.
Oh, yeah.
Which I have heard can get pretty abusive
but
when you have two of them.
It's not very good because it takes up your lucky cigarette case slot. So you know what? Let's just throw that one in the bin.
There's definitely not a card called a Relic Hunter.
Yeah,
that card definitely doesn't exist.
Too much XP. Too much XP. Too much XP. Who can afford it?
If you want to reach for the low-hanging fruit, Aeon Chart 4 is there, and you can do all sorts of nasty recursion tricks with that. Other cards I've seen include the Red Clock, like either version of the Red Clock and stuff like that. So there is, if you want to, say, just turn Bob into an action engine, you can go Aeon Chart 4. If you want him to sort of lean into the helping the group aspect, you can go with Black Market and Untimely Transaction. If you need the resources, you've got Unscrupulous Loan. The rogue upgrades are there's a lot of really spicy targets in there. The fact that Bob can even, if you don't happen to have a dedicated rogue in your deck and you're playing multiplayer, he can pick up Gold Pocket Watch and just give everybody an extra turn, which in 4-player gets pretty sick when you're taking an extra 12 actions before something else happens.
And don't forget, Black Fan.
There's Black Fan as well, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. It's an item. He can play it.
The basic Bob decks, like we've said, that sort of do the scavenging, recycling tricks. And then I think there's probably next level Bob builds out there where you combine it with some of these abilities that he can give stuff to other investigators that they normally would not have access to. Now this just opens a huge Pandora's box, because we don't really have the time to go through all the potential combos, but I think there's some really, if you sit down with your friends and say, okay, Bill here is going to play Bob, let's see what we can do with the items that he can hand out to other people. And I think you could really get some very interesting builds out of that as well.
There's also Tank Bob, who uses scavenging to recur cherished keepsakes and leather jackets, and you just infinitely tank everything. Oh, and Precious Memento. You have Precious Memento as well.
That's right.
That's a lot of soak, honestly. That's
Yeah,
like an investigator's worth of soak on the board with your ally.
just at the base level with being able to share things, like off the top of my head, just imagine being able to give a Guardian Lucky Cigarette Case, because they're not very good at drawing, for the most part. But then you have Bob giving them Lucky Cigarette Case, and then all of a sudden, all those attacks that they're hitting by at least 2, they're drawing cards off of, just right there. Bob is more than pulling his weight by covering other investigators' weaknesses. I'm thinking Garrote Wire and the Guardian. Hell yeah. It's like giving them an extra action every turn to fight things. Yeah, that's just off the top of my head. Yeah.
Kind of on the same line, you could just make Bob your killer. Like, he has 3 combat and 3 agility.
That's true. That's not bad. Yeah, that's true.
That's something you could easily work with. You have access to Delilah. Delilah puts you up to 4 and 4, and then all of a sudden you're pretty competent in fighting things.
Yeah, lots of money in Delilah O'Rourke.
And what's
lots
nice
of money
about
Lola Santiago for primary investigator. Yeah.
What's nice about that build too is that if you're playing Schaffner's catalog, you're saving the resources in your resource pool for Delilah, and then you're buying things with your Schaffner's catalog.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Another card to mention would be Joey the Rat, level 3. This Joey can discard the Schaffner's catalog for more money, which makes absolutely no sense. Hey, you want this used copy of Schaffner's catalog? Like new. Sorry, it's like new.
It's
pre-owned.
It's from 1918. I know it's 1925, but this one's from 1918.
It's vintage. It's vintage. It's a collector's item. And then you have Bob to recur it with scavenging, and boom, 2-card combo or 3-card combo.
That's a rabbit hole you got to be careful with, because I think the power of Joey is actually in the fact that he can play items as fast actions.
Yes, that is also extremely good.
Yeah, I think that's extremely powerful. But oh man, you need a buttload of money to make that.
Well, you have the catalog engine.
Yeah, it's true. If you have the catalog engine, yeah, I could see it. But I think the real power is I like the Delilah O'Rourke or Lil Santiago thing, on a non-seeker or a non-guardian. I think there's I think
that's sort of the problem that Vase and I ran into with Bob, is that he is very good at getting clues, but he's really slow at getting them. Because while he does have 4 intellect, there isn't a lot of extra clue getting without either intel reporting or using or using your limited survivor slots to use look what I found and stuff like that. So Lola would be good for a build like that. Yeah, I think he could be pretty respectable in dealing damage. You could evade something and then shoot it with a Derringer at a 5 or a 6.
Yeah, and if he's able to recycle the level 2 Derringer, I think there's a lot you can do there, because the level 2 Derringer gives you extra actions.
Hmm.
I like that card. The thing is, you got to be careful because if you do the scavenging engine, you could take up a lot of deck space, and then you might not have a lot left over for pushing an agenda forward, such as damage.
I do think that you don't really need to dedicate a ton.
Okay.
You really just need like the scavenging, your lockpicks. You're probably gonna play lockpicks anyway. Derringer, like
Okay.
good items, and then catalog, which again you're gonna play catalog
Okay.
anyway. So
Okay. If you keep it to like 10 cards or so for the engine, I think that would
I feel
work
like
probably.
most of those cards are cards you were gonna play anyway.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, you're
know,
probably
so it's
right.
like
With
like
4
how
intellect,
much
yeah.
yeah, like how much sacrifice are you really making at that point to just
Yeah,
include
that's
two
true.
scavengings in the deck? And I think that's
Hmm.
part of why it's so easy to just sort of gravitate towards that in Bob.
There are quite a few Bob decks out there worth exploring if you want to either to fight, investigate, or evade. I think there is a build out there for you, and if you're interested in helping out the team, there's cards in Edge of the Earth that can help you do that. And of course, Bob has access to all of the rogue cards that can generate extra actions and stuff like that. And you can lean into that as well if you are so inclined. Bob's signature asset is Shrewd Dealings. It's a 2-cost asset that has 2 intellect and a wild skill icon. The talent trait, Bob Jenkins deck only. Reduce the cost of each item asset you play by 1. So once this hits the table, every asset you play is 1 cheaper, and as a response, when you play an item asset, play it under the control of any investigator at your location. We were talking about Bob builds that want to share the love with all of the other players at the table, and once you get Shrewd Dealings down, you can not only play items cheaper, but you can give them to whomever you want.
I wish this card was searchable.
Yeah, that's the only problem with it. Is it seems like such a foundational card, but you can't search for it. There's no way to
Yeah.
find a talent.
It's
Yeah.
so good.
Hmm.
It's like undeniably very good.
Yeah.
I mean, even just that resource reduction is good. Especially if you're playing Joey the Rat level 3, then it's just
Hmm.
fast to play an item. It's awesome.
Hmm.
But there are so many times where being able to like give your ally some extra soak, like with a cherished keepsake or a leather jacket, saves their life for that scenario. And
Hmm.
that's invaluable.
I like how it synergizes with Bob's ability because if he plays an item out of someone else's hand and if they foot the whole bill, it's still a 1 resource discount with Shrewd Dealings, which is nice. Nice little interaction. But yeah, I think the only problem with Shrewd Dealings is that it's a talent and you can't search for it.
Yeah, and we were
But yeah,
talking about
yeah,
that deck that wants to like use Bob to give items to people, and like this is sort of the linchpin, but you have no way of finding it. I mean,
yeah,
thankfully there is some decent card draw in Rogue with Lucky Cigarette Case, but apart from
yeah.
that, you're really just kind of hoping.
Yeah,
Black
you're not
market.
really
You can
getting
go to
it from
black market.
Survivor with the exception of Take Heart. And
You can go to the black market to find your talent.
a very good card if you are going to play items, which Bob is going to do anyway, and a very good card if you want to be able to give those items to other players on the cheap. So Bob's signature weakness is greed. It has the flaw trait Revelation. Take 1 horror if you have 10 or fewer resources. Take an additional horror. 5 or fewer resources. Take an additional horror. 0 resources. Take an additional horror. So if you have 0 resources, you're taking 4 horror? That's bad.
It
Yeah,
is, but it's not direct horror.
No.
correct.
Thank goodness.
And we were just talking about how Bob is probably one of the best investigators to recur items with. So
Hmm. You really got to watch out in the early game for greed when you're like trying to play lots of items and get set up. That's when you can kind of dip to low resources, and that's when greed would hurt you a lot. One thing that's also worth reminding everyone is that during the upkeep phase, you draw your card first before you take a resource. So if you go into the upkeep phase and you have no resources, and you draw greed, you're taking all 4 horror, and then you gain a resource. Very important. Yeah.
That being said, too, like Bob has 8 sanity.
Yeah.
So if you do draw this early and you have no resources, you have time to heal it
Deal
off.
with it. Yeah, that's true.
Because
That's
you
true.
could, if you wanted to play Tank Bob, you could play the smoking pipe / painkillers combo with bandages,
Oh yeah, that's true. Okay.
and then you could, kind of spread the love around, and
Yeah.
you could pretty easily tank this, especially if you had
Okay.
Peter Sylvester and
Level
Yeah.
0 Peter. Yeah, that's not a bad card for Bob actually. Level 0 Peter, just in general.
Yeah,
So,
bumps,
he has
bumps
options.
his agility to 4. And
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you're going to investigate with lockpicks, that's essentially also a +1 intellect.
yeah, I think if this card was in any other class, I would be terrified of it. Because taking, most other classes don't have the resource generation that Bob has access to. And B, most other classes don't have access to the plentiful cheap soak that he has access to in the survivor card pool that he can easily recycle, especially if you're playing that scavenging build. So 4 horror seems like a pretty daunting amount, but I think the fact that it's not direct and Bob is probably going to be playing enough soak to be able to manage it. And there's no, we're saying 4 here, but there's no guarantee that you're going to be taking 4. Bob has access to all of the rogue resource generation. And so even if you pick up you're going hot streak or something like that, or unscrupulous loan, stuff like that, he has ways of boosting his resource total very, very high, very, very quickly. So even if you are, say, at 0 and you're like, okay, I'm in danger, chances are he can get himself out of that situation a lot faster than pretty much any other class has, where it's just like, oh, I guess I'm going to take a resource, spend actions to take resources until I can sort of get myself above that threshold. Bob doesn't necessarily have to do that. So
now, and you have catalog to help pay for things and sort of mitigate that. So
yeah, it seems like one of those things where as long as you don't go too hard on playing stuff early, just playing a Bob deck will probably help you deal with it. You just got to watch out for when you're in the danger zone.
It's one of those weaknesses that you look at and go, oh my gosh, I'm going to take so much horror every time I draw this. But 1, how often are you going to draw it? 2, probably will take 3 most of the time. Maybe, in my experience, and Vase likes to play very low to the ground. Vase would take 3 most of the time. He'd have 4 or 5 resources in his resource pool at any given time. So, he would put 1 or 2 on his memento, take 1, and then just move on.
Yeah, this definitely gives a case for the memento, and the memento that lets you heal horror by succeeding by 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's definitely a case for that with this card, because you
that's...
put some horror on the memento, and it's going to heal back up because the whole rest of your Bob deck is about succeeding something by 2 every turn.
Did we mention lockpicks? I think that might be a good card in Bob.
I think he might be destined for lockpicks. Yeah, it's like, why didn't they reprint it in Edge of the Earth just for him?
This weakness does sort of remind me a little bit of Abandoned and Alone, which is Wendy's weakness. When you're playing Wendy and you haven't drawn your Abandoned and Alone, you have to play her as though you have less sanity than you actually do. And I think that's the same case here with Bob. It's like, Bob has 8 sanity, sure, but until greed pops, technically, if you play like you have 3, even in the worst case, you're still going to be alive when this thing pops. So you do need to be careful about, making sure you have the soak down on the table to be able to keep Bob, sort of keep him at 3, wait till greed goes, and then, okay, now you get to play with the rest of the, whatever greed didn't take, or you weren't able to soak and or heal or mitigate, then you've got that extra to play around with. But until that happens, you do need to be more cautious and just be careful. If this had been released back in the core set days where we didn't have Cherished Keepsake, I think Bob would be
He'd be
that
reaching for that Elder Sign amulet. That's
yeah,
what. That's what
the
would be
threat of
happening.
taking 4 horror would be pretty daunting, as it was with with Wendy and Abandoned and Alone. She
Yeah.
didn't have access to a lot of the great card, like Peter Sylvester wasn't out, Cherished Keepsake wasn't out. Basically, Wendy had to she had Leo DeLuca and a cat
Oh.
and not much else, and so. But now that the card pool has grown, survivors are in a very good spot to be able to deal with this amount of horror, and Bob, certainly being the item engine that he is, has can do it even better than some of the other survivors out there. That's going to do it for our look at Bob Jenkins, the salesman. Have you had a chance to play Bob? Let us know in the comments down below. We'd love to hear from you. Any final thoughts about Bob?
Bob is great.
Yeah.
He's so much fun. He's one of those investigators that you can really sit down with a group of friends and just figure out what you want him to do, and he's going to do great in it.
Yeah. Oh man, him and Carolyn Fern in the same party. That would be that's like teamwork central right there. Yeah. We did it. We did it.
That's actually kind of nuts.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the idea is that you make Bob into a horror healing machine, but with like Precious Memento and Peter and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
there you go. Yeah.
Use Carolyn to
Yeah.
like forbidden knowledge stuff, and you just have infinite money.
Yeah, just have money for everyone. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Carolyn gives him money. Bob spends the money. There we go. We did it. Both of which are maybe we just need to have Vase play two-handed, Bob and Carolyn, and
So
watch his head explode.
so you could do those two investigators, and then you could have an investigator like Tommy or something who wants to play agency backup and some ridiculous huge weapon.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we've already
And
figured this out. Yeah.
you have Schaffner's catalog to help him pay for the big stupid weapon, and then you just give him all the money.
Yeah, there you go. We've done it.
I have to admit that while I was very excited to see what the designers would do with Lily Chen, Bob is one of those Arkham Horror Files characters who has never particularly appealed to me. He's always seemed kind of bland and not that interesting. I think the designers did a very good job of counteracting my fears that he would be somewhat boring. Obviously, he's a much better investigator in multiplayer, where you can really leverage his ability across 3 or 4 other players. But I think in solo, he would be interesting to play as well. Perhaps not as interesting as his multiplayer counterpart, but his ability does work on himself, so you are going to be saving resources on all the items you're going to be playing. And his stat line is such that you can go a bunch of different ways with him. He's got intellect covered, so if you need to investigate, he can do that. He can also get lockpicks, so you can investigate even better. I think I agree he would be a little slow because he doesn't have a lot of extra ways to gather extra clues, which is a bit of a potentially an issue. But he has access to the entire level 0 survivor card pool, and that's incredibly strong for gathering extra clues if necessary. Like, just look what I found alone will get him 2 clues if necessary. So I am looking forward to playing him at some point down the road.
One thing we didn't mention, though, that I think kind of is worth stating, is that I find Bob's 5 rogue slots to essentially be 3 because Lucky
Cigarette Case.
Yeah. And that being said, I don't know how tough it is to fill up those slots and really feel as bad about it. Whereas I feel like in investigators like Lily and Norman, like it's much more of a struggle to figure out what 5 cards should be those 5 cards. But in Bob, I don't know, it doesn't feel as challenging.
It's probably because level 0 rogue cards are kind of bad on average. It's like rogues. One of the rogues' class abilities is that they get to pay XP for things. And so that means not a lot of their level 0s are that great. So, like, all their good allies, except for Leo DeLuca, all cost XP. The lockpicks you want, 1 XP. Savant, 1 XP. All their good weapons, 1 or 2 XP.
Yeah, I
It's
think
you
if you
just
go
not
through the
hard.
rogue card pool, just even from the
Yeah.
revised core, I mean, Bob's not playing Switchblade. He's not playing Burglary.
Yeah.
You could just go, he's, opportunist. No, you could just go through the list and eliminate a lot of level 0 rogue cards that just don't really appeal to him all that much. So
Yeah, and maybe part of that too is that there's also just a lot of better Survivor level 0 cards that kind of do the same thing, like Derringer level 0.
Yep.
It's much better than the rogue version. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other two common cards I would assume are Intel Report. So you'd have Lucky Cigarette Case and then Intel Report as your other two ofs, and then that really leaves you with one.
Yeah, maybe
spicy
watch
one
this. Maybe watch this. That's pretty universally strong.
I don't think it has an intellect icon, which kind of hurts Bob.
Yeah, it's true.
yeah, he can't play it quite as easily as. But I mean, if you're playing Peter Sylvester level 0,
Yeah, use
Bob's
it on
up at a
evasion.
4. He should be okay. That'll help him get away from most stuff.
Yeah, or you could play Elusive or something like that. Even the tabooed Elusive is still plenty fine as a one of. So it feels like his level 0 card pool, at least the rogue cards, feel pretty solved.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few options. Like, I'm a big fan of breaking and entering in a deck like this. Right, because breaking and entering doesn't. It's one of the cards of its kind that doesn't have a level 2 or 3 upgrade. I like that one a lot. Faustian Bargain. Although Bob does have the Schaffner's catalog, so he's not reliant on Faustian Bargain. Quick Thinking is always good. Lone Wolf.
I don't know how much Bob likes Lone Wolf, though.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
He wants to be at other investigators' locations.
That's true.
He wants to be the center of attention.
Well Connected could be fun if you're going that direction, but you're already talking about a bunch of XP to get that whole thing online anyway. He also has access to Adaptable, so he can slot in the right 5 level 0 rogue cards that he needs at the time. So
that's also
it's
true.
not he doesn't have it as hard as Lily or Norman does. But yeah, he really doesn't, because Rogue has a lot of good XP cards, and there are a lot of really good level 0 survivor cards. It's not like Lily, where the Mystic level 0 isn't going to cover for daring or take the initiative.
We didn't even talk about Adaptable, Bob. That opens up a whole nother can of worms that you could slot in the right items for the right scenarios.
You know what he can do? He can slot in Adaptable as his 3rd XP in the thick of it, Bob. So that way he doesn't even have to spend XP to use Adaptable anymore. He just starts with it. He's already adaptable, and he's got the Sharon's Obel. Like, he is all in.
That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.